Hello and welcome to Soundlike, where today we're going to be looking at the dark side. Now you might be thinking and worrying that this is going to be quite a difficult song or of an abstract song to capture sound-wise, but have no fear. This is going to be a very relatively easy song to both kind of sound like, and also you will discover it's quite easy to play. So we're going to look at a few effects. It's very straightforward, kind of very basic effects, or at least basic effects that we can utilize to sound like some of these more kind of crazy and out there sounds that Matt spent thousands of dollars worth of equipment on using. That we can get around that by using only a few £100 worth of gear. For this song, I'll be using my MA Evo with Sustainiac for kind of obvious reasons when we get into the video. But before we dive in, don't forget to like, share and subscribe and hit the notification bell to let you know when I upload new content. Now, teas in hand, and let's dive into pedal cam. So with pedal cam for Dark Side, I am using only 4 different sounds for this within its own patch, so we can flick through those quickly. One, which is the chorus, the verse, the riff, and the solo, and that is it. So let's just start at the top with the chorus. Now this is just number 2, which is the overdrive distortion. Because of the kind of era it's in, it's leaning a lot more towards the distortion side of things and wants to be a bit more precise and more of a direct sound rather than a broad overdrive sound. So that just sounds like this. It's pretty easy, pretty kind of a standard distortion sound if you ask me. So if you've got a distortion pedal, pretty much anything will do as long as it's kind of got that nice kind of sound to it. Next is the verse. Now this uses the, in no particular order, the delay, my boost pedal and my whammy set to an octave harmony up, and which will sound like this. Delay going on there, and the harmony kind of gives it that ethereal kind of sound to it. That's just used for the verse, for that kind of mimicking the vocal bit. The next one is the riff, which is just the big muff, sounds a bit like this. Kind of a standard big muff sound. And then finally, the last one is the solo. Utilizing the big muff again, delay, and the whammy set to an harmony octave down this time. You just have to trust me because there's some MIDI being sent and it sounds like this. So those are the sounds. Let's jump into the song. So one key thing to note, and that's kind of quite obvious about Dark Side, is that the intro and the chorus are the same thing. So we're going to be able to do both of those things in one foul swoop. Now, let's just dive into the sound itself and see what's going on there. Now the sound overall is pretty simple. What we've discussed in pedal cam earlier was that it's just a very simplistic distortion sound. That's kind of how I perceive it, and that's what I kind of go for. There's a lot more going on to it in the live version, that's from what I hear, but that's kind of due to what the kind of gear that Matt has at his disposal. For the rest of us who seem to have more humble pedal boards and gear at our disposal, I would say just using a kind of a fairly kind of generic distortion sound kind of works for this, both for the kind of the album version and kind of a live version, just to kind of encapsulate what's kind of going on there. If you listen to the song overall for this section and hear what's kind of going on in there, there's a lot of textures and a lot of layers going on in there. The guitar is actually kind of pulled back and is just supporting the rhythm. So having a kind of a well-rounded, solid distortion sound like this really supports that idea as well. We don't need to get into the realms of having a kind of more out there kind of sound until we get a little bit later on into the song. So I would say for this section, for each time that it appears, you can just worry about having a nice solid distortion sound that's not kind of working, that's not too loud, it's not working too hard to kind of be noticed. It's just get a good solid sound that's going on in there. In terms of your picking and the kind of the sounds that are coming from there, have very strong, sharp, direct strums from your picking hand, and make sure that your fingering on the fretboard is accurate, and you're good to go. It'll sound solid, it'll sound great every time you need to do that section. So with that kind of done and that kind of out of the way now, let's just now move on to the verse, which is a little bit more interesting. Now for the verse of Dark Side, now I would start to argue that this is kind of a more interesting sonically section of the song, so far at least. Now, as we saw in pedal cam, I'm using the blues pedal that's kind of turned all the way up in terms of gain. I'm using the whammy on a harmony octave up, and I'm also using some delay. Now in order to kind of capture that kind of overly kind of synthy sound, I ramp up the level of the delay quite a little bit of a way up, so it's around about 2 o'clock. It might not sound that radical, but the DD7, which is what I'm using, kind of does kind of start to really ramp up the level of delays at around that level, where it starts to kind of like mask the incoming notes, which might sound good if you're kind of going for kind of a traditional kind of like pad sound, but I definitely want to have the initial note of the string, whatever I'm playing, to kind of be heard a bit more prominently than the kind of feedback build up. So that's just something to kind of consider. Kind of do build up the sound of the level and the feedback, which is at around 1 o'clock on the pedal, but you want to have the initial sound kind of coming through just clearly enough so that you can, one, hear what you're playing, and two, that there is a kind of definite direction that's going on with the strings as you're playing it. The whammy is kind of there to support the idea that it's kind of a synthy sound rather than a traditional guitar. I don't think that this is the rig that's kind of used in the album version, or indeed live. I reckon that is just a synth rather than this. But we are guitarists, we've got gear that we want to kind of play around with, so I would say you'd kind of use the things that are at your disposal. If you're super into guitar and you're super into Muse and you want to get some gear, you probably have a whammy pedal, or you are thinking about getting one. So this is a great song to kind of use a whammy pedal for. So the sound itself will sound a bit like this. Definitely has that kind of ethereal sound to it, the whammy helping to kind of boost that even further by harmonizing with an octave higher, and the delay just kind of emphasizing the sounds of that. You could go another step further by adding some modulation to that sound. It would kind of ramp up that kind of synthy sound. It's entirely up to you. I do enjoy that kind of sound generally, as we've seen with other videos, but I do prefer to have the kind of like the drier tone. But you know, maybe once or twice I will change it and kick up and add in some phase to it. But the kind of basic standard sound for this song that I would suggest is just some nice delay and some whammy to it. Obviously, because of the guitar that I'm using, I do have my sustainer pickup to help with that sound, to kind of keep the synth kind of idea to it, that there's no picking going on. I do appreciate that not all of you will have that this piece of equipment at your disposal. It's not super important that you have that, it's just a nice addition if you do. So without the pickup, it will sound a little bit more like a traditional guitar, so a little bit will sound like this. It still very much sounds like what's going on with the sustainer version, but you can hear the picks on the string, which just kind of break up the idea or the illusion that you're kind of emulating more of a synth than a guitar. It's not the end of the world. The main thing that you are searching for when playing guitar is that you are hitting the right notes and it sounds good. This technique sounds great. You are playing the right notes. If you've figured it out, all you are doing there is just playing along to the vocal melody. It sounds fantastic, or you can then just improvise and make up whatever you want around that. I would say the main thing for this part is just kind of focusing on that kind of ethereal sound. This is just a suggestion. You could take it in a completely different direction by adding loads of reverb or ramping up the sound of the delay. I really prefer the whammy and delay kind of combo for that, and then adding in some sustainer to take out all the attack and then just have that kind of like droney sound go on. That's just what I prefer, and that's what I feel and what I hear that works well with the song in itself. So that covers all of the verses that go on, all 2 of them, I believe, in this song. So we've now looked at the verses and the choruses. Now let's look at the riff with some Big Muff. Okay, so now for the riff in Dark Side. Now this appears twice in the song, and each time I use the Big Muff. Surprise, surprise. So in terms of the kind of sound that you want to go for, the Big Muff is kind of pretty much the only sound that I'm going for with this. You could, as with the verse, you could add in some modulation to kind of really kind of stretch out that sound and make it sound a bit more weird and a kind of bit more out there. But it's entirely up to you. The standard sound I go for is a Big Muff with lots of sustain on it, and it will sound like this. It's pretty simple, it's pretty straightforward, it's just a standard Big Muff sound. In terms of the playing, I know that Matt kind of plays further up the neck. For some reason, I find that I get the same sound, the same notes, further down the neck, and just kind of relying on the A string for the 5th harmony. It's a little bit easy to get, you don't have to stretch with your fingering. I don't know what Matt's doing there, but I just prefer that approach. It's a little bit easier to kind of play, but that's just kind of by the by. In terms of your playing and your fingering, pinpoint accuracy is really key. Don't strum all of the strings, and just kind of like hope for the best with your playing as much as you can. In terms of your picking hand, it's good to kind of have your hand kind of anchored to the bridge so that your pick is kind of really near the strings the whole time, so that your accuracy can be as good as it can be. Kind of waving your hand around isn't going to sound as great, so it's a real kind of a good exercise in kind of more accuracy and just kind of solid playing, obviously timing as well. In terms of what we've kind of looked at so far, the kind of picking techniques aren't broadly too different. The biggest difference is between the riff and the chorus. The chorus is kind of relying on big kind of like strides and strums on the strings, whereas the riff, obviously with being a kind of a single note riff, is kind of really relying on your accuracy here. But this, as we're kind of seeing, Dark Side isn't a particularly difficult song, both sonically or kind of like playing wise. But the most difficult part is the solo. So let's look at that now. So the solo for Dark Side, you want to keep note of several things. Big Muff, obviously. There's some whammy with some harmony octave down, some delay, because delay is awesome, and to cross your fingers that it sounds good. So hopefully it will sound like this. So in terms of the kind of key sounds for this particular song, I would argue that each individual, all 3 components, the muff, the whammy and the delay, are all kind of equally important to kind of achieve the outcome that you're looking for. Obviously, if there had to be one, the key sound for this is going to be the big muff, just to kind of power through, really kind of take control of those mids and really push them as much as you're kind of pushing the pedal, really. But they do really come together as a whole to kind of make the sound overall. The whammy to kind of give that lower octave, to give it the kind of rumbly sound as much as possible, and the delay just to really thicken out that sound. Obviously, this is not the sound that's used in the album version, and certainly not that's used live. Obviously, because Matt has that kind of internal kind of synth thing built into his guitar. Obviously, I can't achieve that because I don't have a custom-made, non-commercial synth product to put in my guitar. All I've got is what's on my pedal board, but I feel that I can half recreate that sort of sound, or the idea what that sound is going for, with the whammy particularly. In an ideal world, I would like to be able to push that harmony octave up as well as down, so I'd have 3 octaves to play with to really thicken it out. The lowest octave to kind of really give that kind of nice rumbly bass synthy sound, and then the higher octave to kind of give that more kind of lightened, twinkly version, and together it would sound really good. And then obviously you can still hear the original guitar signal coming through as well. But I don't have thousands of pounds worth of gear. I've got similar equipment to what you might have at home, but if we've kind of got similar gear, we're in good hands. We can do these sorts of things. It just requires a bit of attention and tweaking, a bit TLC with the pedals that we have to get the best sound possible with this. On a first listen through of Dark Side, it might sound a bit more of a ridiculously over-the-top 80s kind of sound, but if you break it down and kind of apply some more creative approaches to the way that these sounds are being recreated, they're actually pretty achievable, I would say. And I would say that we've achieved those sounds quite well with the sounds at least my disposal. So that's the sounds in bulk overall. So let's now go and debrief. So that was Dark Side in its entirety from start to finish. I hope that made sense to you in terms of the effects that I suggested you use, in terms of just a one solid distortion for the chorus and light crunch and delay and some whammy for the verse and so on. Obviously those sounds are admittedly quite basic. The effects are maybe not. I would say a whammy is pretty, at this kind of stage in kind of like where guitarists are these days, a whammy is a pretty basic tool. They kind of seem to pop up on so many ranges of pedal boards. They're quite almost a necessity pedal. And obviously you don't have to get one, but they're quite a really useful and versatile pedal. So the sounds are quite basic and they're very simple. This song is an exercise in challenging you to think about what have you got to bring to the table effects-wise to kind of really push that sound. The unsung hero, I would say, is going to be the delay here to kind of add for that kind of helping to kind of pull together that kind of synth pad sound for the verse and really thickening out that tone for the solo. Obviously the effect that doesn't need any introduction is obviously the bigma for that very solo itself. And the whammy is there as a great support as always. You can also click here to watch my full cover of the Dark Side, so you can see how I'm using these effects and these techniques in real time along with the song. There we have it, that was Dark Side. It's very, very simple both to sound like or an amalgamation of it. I know that my sound is not, strictly speaking, the exact sound we hear on the record, but it's a good interpretation of what's going on there. But I'd be very interested to know what you guys kind of thought of this video and how you've taken some of these suggestions on board to apply them to sound like Dark Side itself. So let me know down in the comments, and while you're there, don't forget to like, share and subscribe. I've been Harry, and thanks for watching.